In addition to allegations that Diebold vendors offered gifts to election officials, reports also surfaced that some had direct ties to political parties. Before the 2004 presidential election, Walden Odell, CEO of Diebold, announced that he had been a top fundraiser for George W. Bush. In a letter to potential donors, Odell wrote, "I am committed to helping Ohio deliver its electoral votes to the president." Reports of voting difficulties have been increasing over the last decade. We now know that voter suppression and irregular tallies, reported widely in 2004, were not unique to that election. Reviewing the last decade, we can begin to see if there are patterns. The first major election in which a voting machine company appeared to influence the outcome was in Nebraska.
In 1996, Chuck Hagel ran for U.S. Senate, and although his opponent, Ben Nelson, the incumbent governor, was ahead in the polls and was expected to make an easy win, Hagel won the election.
The final pre-election polls were off by 14%. It was later learned that the winning candidate, Chuck Hagel, had failed to disclose that he was the former chairman and still part owner of the company that counted the votes and put him in office. The first well-publicized exit poll discrepancy in a U.S. presidential race was in Florida in 2000.
On the morning of November 7th, I contacted a friend of mine who is a professional political consultant, and I said, "What are the tracking polls telling you today? Because I know you have it. I know you have these numbers." And he said, "The numbers indicate that Gore will win the election somewhere between 30 and 80,000 votes in Florida."
Early in the evening, the networks confidently predicted that Gore would take Florida, after exit polls showed him ahead by 7%.
A big call to make. CNN announces that we call Florida in the Al Gore column.
That prediction turned out to be premature.
Our earlier declaration of Florida back to the too close to call column.
Vote totals continued to fluctuate throughout the night.
There were so many flip-flops election night 2000 when network heads were questioned about it during hearings. One congressman called it
a monumental screw-up.
Activists across the country launched challenges, stating that thousands of Florida voters had been blocked from voting, that their names were illegally removed from the lists, or that their votes simply hadn't been counted. Ion Sancho's jurisdiction, Leon County, had among the lowest error rates in the country. Based on that success, the Florida Supreme Court put Ion Sancho in charge of the Florida recount.
I really thought that the whole process was about counting all of Florida's legal votes. That's what I thought.
On December 12th, 2000, the Supreme Court stopped a recount in Florida and ended the debate. In a 5-4 one-time-only decision that the court stressed would not set legal precedent, the court determined who would be president.
The ballots from Miami-Dade and Palm Beach, which were stored in my office in the safe, would never be counted. And when I went home, that's what I felt. America had been betrayed. For the first time in the history of this republic, a state was prevented from completing its own election.
The only complete count of Florida's votes was done in 2001 by the Media Consortium. Their findings indicated that if Florida's manual recount law had been followed, Al Gore would have won the election. The presidential election of 2000 marked a watershed in United States history. The the chaos, the spoiled ballots, the uncertainty, and a deeply divided Supreme Court. The result was a clear loss of public trust in elections. In response, Congress introduced new legislation, upgrading all election procedures, especially voting technology. As a result, millions of voters would be using electronic voting equipment for the first time. In the 2002 midterm elections, Georgia was one of the first states to use only electronic voting machines statewide in an election. Chris Hood was an election consultant who had worked for Diebold, now known as Premier Election Solutions. In 2002, he was on the ground in Georgia, helping Diebold prepare for the midterm election.
The Secretary of State signed an agreement and gave Diebold the authority to run the entire election, top to bottom. So that meant we're going to bring our own people in and basically create the ballots, run the election, tabulate the votes for the state of Georgia. The state had established a test procedure, which was a list of required tests by state law. So during this deployment, when we saw a lot of machines failing, we weren't following the exact procedure called for by the state. So with so many failures and so much confusion and so much unskilled staff, this was a very disorganized operation.
The votes cast on Diebold machines were stored in unprotected memory cards, which could easily be altered. These memory cards not only carry vote data, they also carry computer programs and software updates, or patches. As one of his responsibilities, Chris Hood was asked to place a software patch on the machines to be used in certain Georgia counties before the election.
I'd receive a call from one of the project managers at Diebold to be at this warehouse, which was in this case DeKalb County, and references were also made to Fulton County.
Fulton and DeKalb counties are home to more than half of the Democratic voters in Georgia.
After we got into the warehouse, Bob Urosevich, the president of Diebold, arrived with a stack of these memory cards and announced that we needed to patch the machine because the clock wasn't working properly. So he said this will fix that situation, and we also needed to patch every machine in the state.
One closely watched Georgia race in 2002 was the Senate contest between Max Cleland and Saxby Chambliss.
In the final pre-election polls, incumbent Democratic Senator Max Cleland led his Republican challenger, Saxby Chambliss, by 5 points, and most people were expecting that he would be reelected.
We were only a few weeks away from an election, and we're going to patch every machine. This operation took all day, but after this event, I never heard another word about a patch. I never heard about any other counties being patched. It was also said that the state was not to know about this.
When the actual votes were tallied, it was Saxby Chambliss winning over Cleland by 7 points. That's an unexpected 12-point shift in a state that for the first time had deployed across the state Diebold touchscreen electronic voting equipment.
In Alabama in 2002, initial returns showed Governor Don Siegelman winning re-election. However, before his win could be certified, officials in Baldwin County claimed that because of a computer glitch, votes there needed to be recounted.
After the polls had closed, after midnight, when the poll workers, the Democratic poll workers and the Republican poll workers and representatives of the media had gone home, the election officials, all of whom are Republicans, got together and recounted the votes. In that process, I lost some 6,000 votes, enough to swing the election from me to my Republican opponent. It didn't affect a single other race. Not one other vote changed that night.